Alright, for this video I want to show you guys the steps of how I go about creating a SysQue shop drawing that we would personally use in the field. I've gone ahead and done a lot of the foreground work, but I'll still go ahead and show you what that process looks like. So right now I'm working in a job out in McDonough, Georgia. It is a water treatment plant, and we're going to be looking at the reuse water small bore piping. So we'll go ahead and take a look at these systems here. I've already, like I said, created our assemblies. The way that I go about doing this is when it comes time to actually do the shop drawings, by this point you've already met with the engineers, you've already met with some of the field crew maybe, or even the superintendents, or at least spoken to them to get their opinion on how it needs to be ran. They've already gotten you submittals and approval for specific inline equipment, or even accessories, or even the specific pipe type being used. We've already gone over a different video on how to actually do that layout to go from generic pipes to specified equipment and the specific pipes therein. Right here we're using a Viega system with different accessories in line. But once you've gotten to the point where everyone has given you the thumbs up and they're ready for drawings, this is the point to where we're going to go ahead and start the final process of getting a drawing made. Now, I say final process, but in all reality, there are times where an engineer will submit these drawings to the designer. They will come back and say, we don't like it, and you have to go back to the drawing board. That happens. Don't take it personally. It's part of construction. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and step through and show you guys what I did to select certain elements that I've selected of how I want to set up my sheets. Let's go ahead and start here. So whenever I'm creating a drawing, I want there to be just enough information that each sheet is useful, but not too much information or too little information to where it's a waste of my time if it's too little, or it's a waste of my time in that there's too much and it wastes the guys in the field time, because when these sheets are printed, there's too much going on. They will not follow along, and it becomes a very difficult thing to read. So when I'm selecting elements, I'm starting from 000, which means I'm starting at the very beginning of a line. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that here, I guess. All right, so like I was saying, I start at the beginning of a line, and as you can see, it's already pulling up what's called an assembly. And the way that those are created are a selection of particular elements. And for this instance, I've selected the starting point, and I've also selected here at the very end, this cap. And I went ahead, control clicked, and I made this selection. So this is an entire selection of elements that I want to be featured in my first drawing. And the way I did that, I went to create spool, and I created a spool. It started at 001, and I started from there. So that's what I did. I went ahead and created these all as one, and I selected all of these as one as well. And the reason I did that is because they're typical. So I wanted all of these to be in the same bill of materials, even though when I get to the sheets, I'm going to set it up a bit different so that I only have one of these elements detailed out to the T, as far as actually to the T, but also with dimensioning and tags, because I don't want there to be an excess number of sheets all for the same elements. So I will combine as many as I can. And the good thing about this job is there's been a lot that have been able to be cut and paste across. So I went ahead and did that. Next element was this water fire hydrant system. Again, from the threadelet. I don't include threadlets because threadlets are on the ductile iron pipe manufacturer. They are not something we are providing. That would be something that the ductile iron pipe person provides. However, tapping saddles are something that we would end up purchasing. So when it comes to tapping saddles, we pick those up in our drawings. Same thing here. I went ahead and did this. There still is an open coordination issue, but because they've asked me to go ahead and start making these drawings, I will leave this blank, and they can either relay the information to me later and I can add it, or they'll have to do that in the field, which is fine. You won't always have everything 100% coordinated by the time you need to start making drawings. This process can take a while, and it's better to get as far into the process of coordination as possible, but if you have to go ahead and start making drawings, that's fine. The next selection set I made, which is the number 5, was all of these elements, and similar to the grid equipment here at the top, all of these are similar, so I grouped them all into one, but I will showcase only one of the compactors with dimensions and call it typical across all 3. So the bill of materials will have all 3, but the drawings will only contain one of the elements. And again, threadlet pipe, so I'm not including those in my takeoff. However, on the back side of this unit here, I will go ahead and show you here. Go ahead, and if you don't know this, when you select an entire element group in a 3D view and use the selection box tool, it will create a selection box around those elements. So it's really good when you have something kind of hidden away, but you know you need to view those in a element, or excuse me, in a 3D view. This is the last piece of the puzzle, and as you can see, there is a tapping saddle here for this reuse water. I went ahead and added that as well, and you can see here when I created these elements, it did not seem to want to pick up this piece here, and it's because it's mechanical equipment, and I don't want mechanical equipment to be a part of the spool drawings because this mechanical equipment comes with this fluidizing grit unit, so I don't want to include that. So I've added everything up to the connection point, which is fine, and there are again 3 of these similar units down across the entirety of this channel. So all 3 of those, because they're similar, will be included in the same assembly. And like I said, you're going to create that assembly by selecting the pipes that you want and clicking the create assembly. I'll show you here again. So if I were to click this, I would go to create spool from the SysQue system here, and that would create a name here and under assemblies. Now, if you were, for instance, able to go through and say it didn't pick up these elements here, like for instance, you really wanted it to click this, and it was a pipe element that just didn't seem to get picked up, but it needs to. You can always go back and hit Edit Assembly. When you do that, it'll show you all the elements in that assembly. You can then either remove or add. And then once you've done that, you'll hit finish and it'll reprocess. Now, once we've gotten to this point, it is time to go ahead and go to our SysQue tab, and we have Prefab Manager. At this point, we've already looked at how we're going to set up all of our SysQue templates. Again, SysQue templates are made from a Revit project that we tailor to just have the elements for a SysQue based view. So that's our 3D views for our ISO, our plan views, and our section views, as well as all of our schedules, whereas everything else in that project, it really acts more of like a template rather than a project, and that's already been loaded in. But in case you haven't loaded that in yet to this particular Revit project, in case you're working on a new one, go to the gear icon settings and you'll go to load template. You want to go ahead and make sure you hit load. SysQue has their own spool template that you can always modify, or you can create your own. I've created my own and I've already added it here at the bottom. You can see I've already added that here. There are plenty of others, but I just have the one. So once you've done that, you will select the elements that you want to run the generate sheets. I've done that already. It takes a little while depending on how many elements are in that particular project. But when you are completed with it, it will show you these here, the open sheets, and we'll go ahead and open up sheet number 1. So this is what it will look like minus these elements in the corner, depending on how you've set up your template. Again, this is what mine ends up looking like when I first open it. Stuff's kind of all over the place, and these are down here. I'll go ahead and talk about what I like to do with these, and then we'll go back to number 1, and then I'll speed through and show you then how I do my cover pages. So this is typically what it ends up looking like at the very beginning, and what I like to do is start with my pipe at the very top right. I try to make it as equal as possible. Again, it's a personal preference. I tend to think that these shop drawings are almost like a work of art in that they have a personal touch and flair to them. When each person does it differently, it's not one way or the other, you know, my way, the highway. It is a personal preference thing. So if you feel like you want this to look a certain way, by all means, go for it. Just make sure to talk with the engineers and the other people involved that will be using these drawings. Make sure that you've captured the elements that they need to see. If I like it, but it has no purpose to the engineer and they dislike it and it's more confusing, it's not going to help in the long run. You want to make sure these are helpful. So I've just gone in and I like to make sure all these are single line items. A lot of times these materials can get really long in names, so I'll just drag those out and make it all here in the top left corner. The next thing I can do is when I'm looking over here, I've got a couple of different elements that are not being filled in, and the reason these aren't being filled in is some of these have to do with the project parameters that are not currently set up, and that's fine. This is again a template sheet that it's going to be reading specific project elements, and that's fine that it's not reading for this particular case. All I really want to do is change the author being myself. So I will go ahead and change that here, change that to my tag. I like to do all caps, again, preference. And then last thing I like to do is the sheet name is RW12-02, and that is also fine. The only time I'm really going to change that is when I get to the cover page. I will change that to a specific cover page name that I will come up with. Last thing you can do at this point, I'm not going to, but I think I've already set it up. Revisions are something that you can find under, I believe it's the View tab and Revisions. Now, I've already created one for spool drawings. I tend to leave out the date. I leave a issued by, which is the company I'm working for, and it's only a tag. I don't want to do cloud end tag, and I'll hit OK. Now, one thing I like to do is make sure when I do across all of these, I can add revisions on sheets, and I will make sure that it has the spool drawings, and I'll hit OK. And the reason I do that is when I export these to PDF, I will go in and I will put the revision number, and I will also go in and put the revision date. And then I will put my personal stamp here so that when I'm exporting these to the project staff to review for field use, that I've put in all the information that they can go off of. They can see old versions versus new versions, and then I've also got my stamp saying this is the time and date that things were done, these are for review, and once they tell me that they're good, I will send out a second set with any of their revisions as the final copy. So now that is how I set up my sheet. I'll go back into number one. I can go ahead and close this prefab manager, not really needed right now. Move my face right back down to that corner, and I will go ahead and finish this back out with my name. And so now we're at basically the starting point where we want to be to go ahead and start looking at our drawings. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, and again, this is kind of where a personal preference comes in. I like seeing my sheets with as much information as possible as far as pipes are concerned, but I want there to be shaded graphics, and I want there to be transparencies for things I'm not using, because I don't want them to take up the majority of my, visual learning, let's say, when I'm looking at these drawings. I want them there so that they can be recognized as elements in the area, because sometimes they may come into an issue in the field and they're reviewing something and they want to run it a different way, but when they're looking at the sheets, they recognize that just because it's not there in the field doesn't mean that it's not going to be there in a month or two when they go to put it in. So it's good to have all the elements that might be in the area visualized in your drawings, but having them transparent kind of gives it a little bit of a less visual takeover from the information you're trying to give, which is dimensioning and layout. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to open this here and I'm going to select all the 3D views. This is a good way to go ahead and set your view scale, but for now, all I want to do is go to section box, click it, and then take my mouse cursor off of it. Now, when you do that, it goes ahead and applies any of the settings that you've currently just set in your properties to those elements. So when we click section box, it adds that section box. You can't see it, and that's fine. We've gone ahead and created these sheet views a specific way, so when I click it, it adds it, but you may not see it. And you'll see why here in a minute, and I might even show you without it, but it's almost a headache to deal with. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to view templates. Now, I've already showed you guys how I made my view templates, but we're going to go ahead and click on our spool template, go to edit the visual graphics, and we'll go through and we see all the different elements that I've already set up for what should be there, what shouldn't be there, and I'm getting out of the habit of using this element based selection and transparency and trying to move over to filters, but for now this works perfect for my template, and I can always edit that later. Specific annotations for tags, no analytical, no imported categories, but my filters are where it's important. So I'll go ahead and delete this. This was from a previous job I was working on. And again, if you need Revit links, specific links can be added, and work sets. We use work sets at this job to show different elements. Currently those are all visible, which is good. So now I'm going to go to add, and I'm going to have edit/new. So I'm going to go ahead and show you, when you go ahead and make those drawings in the Prefab Manager, SysQue will create a template for your filter for each one of those specific spool tags. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 0, 0 came from a different thing I was working on earlier. I'll go ahead and delete that and just show you what I'm going to do. So SysQue 001 is a does not equal, and that is perfectly fine. We want to leave that alone, but we want to duplicate it, and this is the only time you're going to do this is at the very beginning. We're going to duplicate it. We're going to rename it 000 because I want it to be across all these elements. So now 000 does not equal RW-12001, and that's the naming convention that we've given this reuse water. What I want to do is I want it to be does not contain. So it goes to does not contain RW/12/, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want everything within the RW-12 to be left alone, but everything else to be edited. So I'll go ahead and hit apply, hit OK, and go down to here. And because I'm working in 001, I will click that as well. Hit OK. Out of personal preference, I'm going to move 000 up. And now I'm left with these here. I'm going to add 80%. Again, why? Because it's a personal preference. Choose what you'd like. I think 80% is just transparent enough to where you know it's there, but not taking over the entire visual area. So now we know that 001 dictates the visibility of anything with a spool tag that does not equal 001. So 002, 3, 4, 5, and 6 will all be 80% transparent, whereas everything in 001 will not be affected. However, RW-12 dictates the transparency for everything that isn't a spool tag RW-12. So those two here will cover your bases, and we're going to have 000 on every single one, but RW-12-001 will update the template every time we go to the next drawing. So we're going to hit apply and OK, and that gets us out of our visual graphics. Again, you can come in here and edit the scale. I wouldn't do that until you've already seen what it's going to look like on those pages. Now we're going to hit apply, but not OK. We want to go ahead and just hit apply. Let it apply to those views. You may even see some change here in the background, maybe not. Let that change those elements, and now we're going to go to none. Now the reason we want to do that is because we want to be able to adjust the visual graphics for each view case by case. If for whatever reason, let's say there's a piece of ducting and the template you have doesn't show ducting or has some other type of view, we can always go in and adjust it that way. So we're going to go hit apply for none and hit OK, and now we can see why creating those section views was so important. The section view only does a selection around these elements. Similar to the layout when you're clicking on a selection of elements in your 3D view and you want it to only show those elements, it does the exact same thing in this case. If you weren't to do that at the very beginning, it will create a selection box around the entire job, and what happens is you have to go into each view and shrink it down to just the elements that you want to see, and that takes time. The name of the game is to try and beat the clock, and by that I just mean you want to make sure your time is being used efficiently. So now I will go in and I will visualize just a general layout of how I want this to go. And for now, I can already tell I'm going to have to adjust my scale just a little bit. So go ahead and click on these 3 elements, and I'll just do the selection here. I'm going to go back up to the top, and I'm going to choose a 1/2 inch by 1 foot scale change, and I will see what that looks like. And I believe that might be too small, so I'm going to do 3/4 instead. I think that's probably where I'm going to keep it. I may individually change 1 or 2 others, but for now I think that's going to be perfect. And so let's go ahead and just move these little titles just around. Personal preference again, on the 3D views I tend to keep the tail only to the end of the tag, and I'll put the tag in an open space. I don't want this to not be visible, but I also don't want it taking up a lot of area. So now I can see again SysQue automatically creates tags, and those tags are based off these piece numbers. Piece numbers will take care of them at the very end, right before we publish these to PDF editing. So